I used to sit in my car in the parking lot of my office every single morning before work. I had the engine on, AC blasting, both hands on the wheel, and I would take these long, deliberate breaths, just trying to untie the knot in my stomach before it turned into this wave that crashed the second that I walked through the doors. I just sat there, idling, allowing the car to hold me in place before I had to go inside and be the version of myself that the job needed. Not ironically, long before I knew that I would pursue an entrepreneurial path, I was in this group coaching container called Find Your Ideal Job. I remember sending these video messages to the other participants in this group through Marco Polo, which was the tech that we used to stay connected between calls. And I would try to express all of the dread I was carrying, just hoping that I could unload it before I took my first steps inside the door. Maybe you have your own version of that, sitting in your car or the shower, or some other private space where for just a few moments you're alone and you have time to be completely honest with yourself. I want to tell you what kept me sitting in that parking lot for as long as I did and what it actually took to put my metaphorical car in drive. This was a few years back, right after the COVID era flexibility disappeared and my company's leadership called everyone back into the office 5 days a week. At that time, I was human resources in my corporate career, so I was expected to be a good soldier about it, modeling the way, having this smile plastered on my face, just proud and grateful for my job at a company that so many people aspired to work for. And the thing is, I was grateful. I'd worked hard for this job across this 14-year corporate career, and I definitely didn't take it for granted. But everything underneath the gratitude was just revolting. I kept telling myself there was no other option. I was in too deep. Sure, I could leave for a different company, and I'd done that before. But as I said, I'd been through enough of these rodeos to know it would just be a different horse on the same ride. Looking back, the story that I was telling myself, that it was too late, I couldn't change anything, it really wasn't true. It was the excuse that I had to stay the same because I was terrified of who I'd have to become in order to be successful at anything else. Surrounded by obligation and fear and an identity built entirely around fitting in somewhere, the possibilities for me genuinely felt bleak. And it wasn't a failure of my imagination. That's just what happens when you've been inside a system long enough that its ceiling becomes your own. I'd already dreamed up an ideal job description in my coaching group, and I'll share some of it if you stick with me for a few more minutes. I wrote it in November of 2022. And as I sit here in July of 2026, almost 4 years later, it's describing exactly what I'm doing today. I heard a podcast recently interviewing this social scientist named Todd Rose, and he studies something called collective illusions. His research is on how consistently we miscalculate what other people actually think, and how that miscalculation drives us to conform to a consensus that half the time doesn't even exist. As I sat with that, I realized part of what kept me in that parking lot was the assumption that I was following this expected path and that everyone around me thought it was the right one. It was the very definition of success. But who is everyone, actually? And why did I care so much what they thought? My brain was just doing what brains do. It was keeping me safe, which looked like staying the course. There was this unspoken agreement running underneath everything. If it looks good from the outside and it feels hard, then it must be right. And so Rose makes this distinction that I keep coming back to. He separates fitting in from belonging. Fitting in is conditional. It's a performance. It's like, hold these beliefs, occupy this role, present this version of yourself, and then you'll be accepted. Belonging doesn't ask you to make yourself smaller or safer or more palatable for other people. It doesn't depend on the title or the company name on your resume. It shows up when you dare to be exactly who you are, and all of you is welcomed, even by people who don't agree with your choices. That distinction stopped me. At some level, I guess I stayed the course because I didn't want to risk rejection. And I didn't have another model or a community waiting to welcome me if I left. My community was this group of human resources professionals. And so most of us have been optimizing for fitting in since we were young enough to sense that not fitting in was dangerous. And the corporate world, for everything real that it gives people, is one of the most sophisticated systems ever built for producing exactly that trait. And I say that as someone who spent over a decade inside of it, genuinely good at the game. And specifically in my HR role, I was actively helping build it. We called it culture. What I didn't have, though, was a language in that parking lot for the dread that wasn't really about the commute or the inbox or even the job description itself. It was the cost of that trade finally coming due. My body was telling me louder and louder every single week that the person walking through those doors each morning wasn't the authentic me. It wasn't the version of me that was fully alive. I was so busy fitting into who I thought I should be that I never got around to belonging to the one person who actually mattered, myself. There's a term I learned from the poet John Keats that I think is so fitting for this conversation, and he calls it negative capability. It means the capacity to remain in uncertainty, mystery, and doubt without reaching for a fact or a reason just to make that discomfort stop. He spoke about it in the context of great artists, but I've also come to see this and come to believe it as an essential inner skill behind every meaningful life change that a person could ever make. Because what actually kept me on that corporate track, sitting in that parking lot, wasn't a lack of desire to change. I was already in the Find Your Ideal Job course. Instead, it was this inability to tolerate not knowing what I was changing into, what I was moving toward, even though I'd literally written the description. I couldn't see it in front of my own eyes. Every time the dread got loud enough to register, my mind would fire back immediately. But what would you do instead? How would you make a living? What if you're homeless? Who would you even be without this job? And that's the lie behind a lack of clarity. It's actually just fear in disguise. So for me, it was easier to keep living inside that story that I'm in too deep, I'm just too late, I'm being responsible. What I understand now, having lived on the other side of it and walked this same road with my coaching clients enough times to recognize the shape of it, is that the path never reveals itself in advance. It reveals itself to the person who has built enough inner capacity to stand in that not knowing without it destroying them. The path is made clear for the one who has the courage to take the first step, and then another, and then another. So let me say the quiet part out loud. The thing I've been circling, which is this: I don't think most people's life work lives inside of a corporation. And it isn't because corporate work is wrong. We need companies. And I still work with leaders and teams inside of great organizations. I know there are real exceptions, but the full, irreplaceable expression of what you are uniquely here to bring forward rarely belongs to someone else's institution or someone else's bottom line. It's whispering somewhere inside you right now. Maybe you hear it in your own parking lot before you walk into work, or you hear it on the drive home. Maybe it's the thing you do on the side that lights you up differently than everything else. Maybe it's the thing that you keep saying you'll do someday, putting off until things feel less uncertain. Here's what I'll tell you though. Things are never going to feel less uncertain. The time isn't coming to find you. There's never an ideal time. You become someone who can stand in the not knowing, or you don't. And I want to be honest that this isn't about quitting your job tomorrow either. Some of you will feel this clearly and move fast. Others will maybe drive in both lanes for a while or forever, out of desire or necessity or both. And that's a valid path too. Personally, I had to leave the corporate world entirely to hear the truth in me clearly. That was my road. Yours might look nothing like it. What I am saying is that you're never too late. You're always right on time. And your life's work isn't waiting for you to have it all figured out first. Here's 3 questions that might help you if you're sitting in your version of the parking lot. Who do you want to serve? What people or community do you feel called to help? What do you care about? What are you uniquely capable of offering to the world that no one else can offer in quite the same way? If that isn't evident to you, look at the intersection of your interests. Maybe it's cooking and sports. Maybe it's sci-fi movies and homelessness. None of this is random. When I look back on that ideal job description I wrote all those years ago, long before I knew I'd be a full-time coach, I can't help but smile. I wrote exactly this. This role exists to catalyze the creator that exists in everyone. I work to help others realize that they are the purveyors of their potential, and a fulfilled life is one that they actively and deliberately design. I support my clients with the means to tap into boundless opportunities with their own innate energy, which has the power to change the reality of their individual lives and organizations. I facilitate your peak state in which you are completely connected to your passion and values, in which you not only conceptualize, but feel your creative power. I support you in clearly and confidently articulating your outcome, your reasons why, and how you will recognize or measure success in your life. I partner with you to name and obliterate your obstacles, both internal and external, which are hindering your forward momentum. And finally, I help you design a plan to take massive action with the tools to support you in doing so on an ongoing basis. I wrote all of that, and yet I couldn't see the forest for the trees because I was so ingrained in the corporate paradigm. I didn't know how I could accomplish these things in that kind of a system. And while certainly there could have been a path to do that in the corporate system, my soul was yearning to do this my way. I just didn't identify as an entrepreneur or founder. You don't need to write your ideal job description today, although it's a great exercise. But you do need just enough capacity to sit with the question instead of running from it. And once again, I'll say that capacity is buildable. It's not a personality trait that some people have and others don't. It's just a practice. It's learning to notice where your energy actually goes, what actually calls you underneath the noise of society telling you what success looks like and who you have to become to live it. That is the whole path from burnout, from lack of inspiration, from unfulfillment, back to something that feels alive for you. If this landed, the full essay I wrote called The Parking Lot is live on my Substack, and I will link to it below. And if you're sitting in your own version of that parking lot right now, unsure how to build the capacity that I just described, I want to invite you to join me on Substack Live this coming Tuesday, July 14th at 11 a.m. Eastern. I'm hosting a session called From Burnout to Vitality. We're going to work through exactly this. where your energy is actually going, what you truly want underneath that exhaustion that you feel. And the first real steps towards a life and a way of leading that feels like yours again. It's free to attend live, and if you can't make it, then there'll be a replay available also. My paid subscribers will get lifetime access to both the recording and the tools and exercises that we work through. So you can keep coming back to it whenever you want. I'll drop the link below to add it to your calendar, and I hope to see you Tuesday. Thanks for being here for another episode of The Vital Life.